Hey, Rafael Hoffman here. I hope everyone is doing well who's watching this. I just want to bring out the answer to this question I've been seeing misconceptions about is what is enlightenment? And if you've watched my videos, you know that enlightenment is just realizing that you don't really have a self. You don't have there's no one behind you. There's no one who is you. And then nothing's really taken so seriously and so on and so forth. So when people call people enlightened, like this person's enlightened, that person's enlightened, I'm very skeptical. And the people that say this are usually people that have not fully allow themselves to be human again. Meaning you come to a point where you realize that there's no self. And you can have dark night of souls and awakenings and you can have a channel I watch. I'm happy he goes through this or went through this, where he has a non-linear experience of reality. I've went through this where you go into the future, and hopefully it doesn't get shut down because for some reason when I talk about this stuff it doesn't work. But you go into the future and then you go into the past again, and then you're you, but then who is you? And questions like this come about really because we're everyone and we're just happening all at once. And then the soul or your higher essence is moving into different bodies. So you might have a non-linear reality. Some people will go through this. It's like part of the mystical experience that's always happening that you don't remember and you don't know about in the body, but it happened. It's more of like a theoretical happening, but it happened because you needed something logical to explain why the presence is taking place. So basically, you may have experiences like that on your way to awakening, right? On your way to enlightenment. But enlightenment is just actualization. It's like disillusionment of the ego. And when you were alive in 2,000 years ago, when you became enlightened, you ended up supporting a doctrine. That was the highest level of consciousness at the time. And nowadays, it's becoming a meditator. That's the highest level of consciousness at the time. And someday you'll say it's a teacher. It's someone who teaches other people how to end their suffering, right? That's probably what it's going to be, stage clear. And you're always going to have actualization. You're always going to have this highest state of being that you're going to think is the top. But it's never the top. It's just a new phase, maybe more disillusionment, maybe less of a sense of self. Maybe a different kind of sense of self, maybe go into a new standard of biological existence where it's not recognizable. I know for me, part of reaching turquoise, right, in spiral dynamics, when I mentioned colors, it's spiral dynamics, it was the heart. The heart. I remember I was pressing in my heart while I was on mushrooms and I looked crazy, but really the heart is where enlightenment takes place, because the mind follows the heart. It's forced into following the heart. So whatever your emotions become, then your mind will follow suit. Tends to be how it is. Like, for example, if you try to force yourself to focus on a specific thing, but then your hormones are raging for a particular girl, you're not going to be able to focus on what you need to do in life. So that's a small example that I'm sure you can apply in other areas. Now the answer to this question, what is enlightenment, is very simple. It's this. But enlightenment was taking place throughout history, and they were often tapping into higher states of consciousness, which involved something like this, the ideals of the time. The ideal of the time back then was doctrine. Okay. But many of them usually have a commonality, for whatever reason, where they experience that they're not important, that they're not the main. So if you are actualized in 2,000 years ago, you may be tapping into the highest levels of consciousness, but then you'll be brought back down and then have an ego structure that frames it in through that lens of that era. And the people often want to say is, no, they were tapping into the highest and we're misinterpreting their teachings. No, I don't think so. I don't think we're misinterpreting a lot of their teachings. I think for the time that was revolutionary, and it was actually necessary to get them out of their mindsets and holes and way of thinking that was much lower down than even them. Okay, so here we have the answer. That enlightenment is realizing that your attachment to who you are is not something that should be taken so seriously. And the moment those epiphanies come about, that's when you reach to a higher state of enlightenment. But if you reach that state through depression and through just feeling a low self-esteem, it's not that your enlightenment won't be lasting. It can be lasting. It's that you won't have much energy. You won't have much concepts, because you came through enlightenment through stillness. So you see a lot of these teachers who in Zen and all this stuff, they don't have much to say if they reach enlightenment through stillness, meaning through like their heart was broken, and that's how they reached to the depression. And the biggest example I have is Eckhart Tolle. Some people say Eckhart Tolle is the most enlightened. The main thing that's unusual about Eckhart Tolle is that he was depressed before enlightenment. So when he transitioned to this like epiphany, like, oh, I don't need to have so much self-importance, so much attention, so much status and all that. When he reached that, it was right after his most depressed state imaginable. So that is felt when you hear Eckhart Tolle. He doesn't have much energy because there's no ego. And so could you say that he's more enlightened? In a sense, you could say he's more enlightened, but it's not about being more enlightened. It's about having a different ego structure. He just has fewer attachments simply because the process was very lucky. He was depressed and he became enlightened. And in his depression, he just had he went from everything is terrible to everything is good. And so there's no content to really talk about when you talk. That's why he's holistic. Holism tends to come to people who have this epiphany after realizing that. After feeling like they needed to take things seriously. So enlightenment is actually right now. And if your heart is very loose, like you're not, like you take certain things seriously, maybe certain biological needs that your ego is attached to. It's not about having an ego that we're talking about. Really, enlightenment is just a new stage where your heart is less heavy, less things bother you, or if they bother you, you move past it fairly quickly. There's no more hang-ups. That's stage turquoise of spiral dynamics. So that's enlightenment. There's no complicating it. It's just you're going to go through a process. And people who are listening to this and they say, I want to grow, and they're in orange, stage orange, like very materialistic and success driven. They're definitely going to say, I want to reach stage turquoise. So what you're going to have to, what they're going to probably do is not be able to fathom this as any other way than a hierarchy. So they're going to rush and say, okay, I got to focus on green, but green is retarded. So, excuse my language, green is clearly failing in their understanding of reality. But they'll try to skip it and they'll move to yellow and intellectualize everything and try to expand their minds. Eventually, they'll realize green's importance, because that's usually what happens when orange learns about spiral dynamics. They'll go through a lot of their green and they'll move into turquoise. But the only way to do that, they'll soon realize their heart has to empty. They have to stop taking themselves so seriously. So that's when dark night of the soul happens. So if you rush this process, you'll probably not appreciate it. Probably, So you take your time on that ferry, But that's what I define as enlightenment. But you know what else was enlightenment? A doctrine 2,000 years ago. So what I'm trying to say is, although it is enlightened, there's always higher, and no stage at these different intervals of the timeline of spiral dynamics was ever superior or inferior. It was just a necessary step to a new grade of realization. So two things. Reaching turquoise is not enlightenment, but it's what we conventionally understand as enlightenment. Okay. And so once considering that the body becomes less significant, the question arises, will the body ever become more significant in much later stages of development? I don't know. It's like I would like to think like the body becomes important again, but no ego. You know, you can frame it like that. I don't think it's true. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's for a different video. But recognize that enlightenment, this pinnacle that you're aiming for, it's not reachable. It's not reachable. What's reachable is actually emptying out your heart, so you can. So what you should do, what I think you should do, is you should exercise, because you want to get your blood moving through the heart. Make a heart strong. Make it very strong. And then work out the pectoral muscles to make the rib cage stronger, and the pecs. So when you do have an awakening, the heart will be able to handle it, because an awakening usually involves palpitations. Your heart speeds up, and you'll be able to handle it, but the epiphany will go by quicker. And you'll be like, oh, I don't exist. Like, oh, I'm everyone. You know, like something like that might take place. But that's basically the next stage of that's basically enlightenment, just that a realization. But when you don't have an ego, that's what some people are saying. That's enlightenment. No, you can't get rid of your ego. And if you try, then there's an ego trying to do that. It's more of like when people say he's enlightened, what you really mean he's depressed as fuck. He doesn't have any of his needs met, and he's okay with it finally. He somehow miraculously was okay with it. And usually they're not okay with it. Usually it's not long lasting. They need to have a wife. They need to have a girlfriend. They need to have some kind of system where they feel accepted. It's a biological need. So no matter what stage you're on, these enlightened people, either they're less enlightened than you think, or they just function a particular way that you define as enlightened. You know, Eckhart Tolle is very enlightened. Is he the most enlightened person? That is relative. He happens to be he happens to be enlightened post-estate depression. So he has zero content, which is rare for a person. That's what you're sensing. And lately I haven't been feeling so high. So my heart feels empty, and I feel like I don't feel attached to myself anymore, and I just don't care I don't care to do anything anymore. It's not depression, it's just I don't have an attachment anymore. But that's not good. You just felt, but you see, I have nothing to talk about now. Now there's nothing to talk about. People are lucky that I'm talking. If I had more ego, I may be talking about more stuff. Probably bullshitting a lot more too. That's the thing. When you get depressed, you bullshit less. So does enlightenment necessitate depression? That's a question, and the answer is no. But when the heart is lighter, and it's kind of gotten used to its own nullification, its own non-existence as anything. This has been my tongue. I guess my ego doesn't want me to say, hey, I'm right here, believe in me. Yeah, you're nothing. You're nothing. Not that you're nothing, you'll never make it in life. No, that's an orange lens of nothing. You're nothing in the sense of the turquoise sense of like, oh, there's nothing here. There's nothing in the heart. There's nothing you're looking at. And all the viewers who are watching this, simply because they have a part of them that's an ego that values appearance. I have a nice face, people say. They value tone of voice. Some people say I have a hypnotic voice. They value contents. A lot of people like my intellectual side. So they have an ego structure that's in play, that's encouraging them to. So I'm not saying get rid of that, and you shouldn't get rid of that. And enlightenment wouldn't be to have gotten rid of that. So don't think it is. There is that misconception. But after the fact, you can use it as an opportunity to be enlightened. Like, oh, this is enlightenment. I'm depressed. This is great. I'm enlightened. And maybe you'll have a little ego about that enlightenment, that you're depressed. That's good. And but it doesn't matter there, because once that gets processed, you'll have the ego side, but you'll also have the contentment side, and it just happens to work, and you'll be enlightened. You won't be enlightened necessarily in terms of the having mystical states, but that is a form of enlightenment. It's like you're just so bogged down, but you realize that it's not important. That's a form of enlightenment. So if you want to be enlightened, if you've had that, and I'm sure you have, you were enlightened at those moments. Maybe you're feeling that right now. You're enlightened. This is unconventional, like it's an unconventional approach. Not many people think this way, but it's the truth. Think about it. It's the truth. You're not taking yourself seriously. You don't really have an ego. You don't care about it too much. And I feel like the only ones who would really process this and appreciate it are those who've kind of already been down this road. So they've had states. They understand what we're talking about. They had a connection to the universe. They realized that there's no I. And, oh, I'm everyone. I'm running the show here. Whoa, like something like that takes place for a lot of people. I think that covers it. You might say this was belabored, but I feel like every repetitive idea here was necessary to bring to the next step. I'll just go with that.